know we've been through all this thing already. But never me again. Never, 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 never me to take no relative with me to the Oval. I'm saying it now and I'm saying it again. No relative with me to the Oval. When I go in the Oval, it's me alone and God going. What? Why I vex? You find I look vexed. You didn't study that when you asked me to take Tanti Mall to the Oval. Eh? I mean to say, my God, I know Tanti Mall from St. Vincent. I know it's she birthday. I know she back in Combined Islands. But why is today of all days you want me to take Tanti Mall to the Oval? Big day like this. Big match going on. Trinidad versus the Combined Islands. You want me to take Tanti Mall to the Oval, and Tanti Mall is 65 years old. I mean, you have radio. You have television. You have transistor. Tanti Mall could have sit down right here in the house and enjoy the match. But instead of that, you make me drag the woman from Curep straight down to the Oval. Woman, you don't know how you nearly lose a husband? Eh? Let me tell you about this woman you're calling Tanti Mall. First of all, I tell Tanti Mall we're leaving 10 o'clock. Match starting 11. We have 1 hour to reach the Oval. Tanti Mall wouldn't leave the house. She only packing basket, saying nobody gonna starve she in Port of Spain. I tell Tanti Mall that Port of Spain have plenty food, but not she. She only titivaying, packing a basket with ginger beer and sorrel and cake and a set of things. And you know who have to carry it? Me. A man like me, who like to go in the Oval with me petticoat in my back pocket, me money in my side pocket, and me 2 hands swinging free. See me now with a basket looking like a vendor. People only asking me, what you selling? And that wasn't all. The taxi. And you know how taxi hard to get in QF. Every taxi a stop for Tanti Mall. She not going in that. Either the taxi driver look like a crook, or them passengers look too low class, or she ain't sure if the car insure. So she not going in that. So tell Tanti Mall, choose your own taxi. She says she want a red taxi. Now tell me what Tanti Mall want a red taxi for? You see that woman? I think she work in OBI. Anyhow, I tell Tanti Mall, take the taxi. And you know how the woman do that? She just step off the pavement and say, stop. Well, you could imagine brakes. I never hear a taxi man cuss so in all my life. But Tanti Mall and take he on. She opened the door, she take over the back seat like the Queen of Sheba, and me going with she smelling like a snacket. Next thing, she tell the taxi driver, no music. He been playing reggae. She said, no music. We want cricket. Taxi man put on cricket. Well, I didn't mind that too much. But Tanti Mall start off, Combined Islands batting. That's we boys, we gonna bust the tail. So the taxi driver turned around and asked she, where you come from? Well, who tell he say that? We get the whole history of St. Vincent. How it called Hiruna, and a whole set of things. But I never see a taxi man drive so fast yet. Because he want to get Tanti Mall out of the taxi. We drive straight to the Oval. Straight, non-stop. You pick up no passengers. Straight to the Oval and put us there. Next thing, Tanti Mall take out a parasol. And not only an ordinary parasol, a pink parasol. Now tell me, what Tanti Mall doing with a pink parasol and is not even carnival? She say that nobody gonna kill she with sunstroke. And the next thing, she opened it and tried to go through the oval gate. Well, you self know the oval gate. Tanty Merle would not close it. Sun mustn't hit she. And you know the oval man and them don't look in people's face. It's only their hand on the money and the ticket, their hand on the money and the ticket. They didn't even know who passed them. But they had to look at Tanty Merle. Because she nearly juke out the eye. I signed myself when we reach inside that oval. And hear what the gate man tell me. If me wife afraid son, why I bring she in the oval? Now here say aunt or grandmother. He say wife. So imagine how I feel when I reach in the oval. And who are bounced up there? Boise and the boys. How you doing? How the madam? But how you could get on so you can't introduce the boys? She have a will. But thank God the cricket's so hot that them fellas didn't have time to take me on. So we settled down to watch the match. Tension in the oval. Combined Islands batting, Trinidad bowling. Islands have runs to make. Trinidad have wickets to take. Tension in the place like steel. If Islands win, they get the shield. I settled down to watch the match. And it's then Tanty Merle start. She touch up by John in front she and tell he to take off his hat. She say it barring her. Well, you know what happened next. He start to cuss she, and she start to cuss he, and I trying to put peace. But I frightened because the real bad John she interfere with. Lucky for them, just then Richards get out because they say the ball follow the bowler hand and hit the wicket, and Richards out the crease, so Richards out. So Tanty Merle forget the bad John and she start with the umpire. She say what she wouldn't do and what she would do to he if she ever get out there on the field. But just then Alan start to play ball and the score start to move and the crowd start to roar and Tanty Merle settle down. That's my boys and them. Next thing you hear, Braps, Chillingford out, Braps, Eddie out, Braps, Corriet out, Imtiaz and Jumadine spinning ball like smoke and the crowd cheering them too. Tanty get vexed. She say the crowd too hypocrite. Is how they cheering for one body and back in the next body. So it's mass in the oval again. Next thing you know, Tanty Merle decide she want to change seat. She say how she can't see from where she's sitting down. And she turn around and tell a man, on top of all that, how Imtiaz stoning. So he turn around and tell she that spinner can't stone. And ask she where she come from. Well, who tell he say that? We get the whole history of St. Vincent again. But this time she stand up on the seat. So I beg she, Doodle darling, please open the basket. Share out the food. So she opened the basket and share out food, but it was like Christmas. If you see food, she even gave the badger on piece. But next thing you know, Alan Book and get catch you out at 96. Mass in the oval. Roberts and Finley batting. 13 runs needed. Tanty Merle says she going down front. She had to go down front. So Tanty in front, I behind. Roberts Boop hit 6. Gomes catch him. Roberts out. Tanty get vexed. She start with Gomes now. She said the way Gomes jump and catch that ball, he must be eat mountain chicken from Dominica. And she start up saying how they're teething. But then the match go. 9 balls to go. 7 runs needed. 1 wicket to fall. Goal come into bat. And Finley at the other end. And it's then the action start. Oval, noise, excitement. 9 balls, 7 runs to go. Noise in the oval. 8 balls, 6 runs to go. Tanti waving the basket now. 7 runs, 7 balls, 5 runs to go. Tanti waving the parasol. 6 balls, 6 runs to go. Tanti on top the seat. 5 balls, 5 runs to go. Police cautioning Tanti. 4 balls, 4 runs to go. I can't even see Tanti now. 3 balls, 3 runs to go. Tanti climbing over the fence. 2 balls, 3 runs to go. Tanti on the people field. 1 ball, 3 runs to go. The man hit the ball, fell down the wicket. 1, 2 runs, score tie, 283. People say the island win. Well, next thing I see is Tanti in the middle of the field. She and 1 set of people from the small island jumping up. And all I could see is the parasol up and down, up and down, up and down, up and down. Next thing, loudspeakers say, match and tie, match draw. Well, who tell them say that? Tanti Merle start up. She said a thief. She said change the rules. She said tie and win, same thing. She said she forming delegation to go to the Prime Minister. And she climb up on the thing that just roll the pitch with. That same Tanti Merle who you say butter can't melt in she mouth. That same Tanti Merle, it take me 2 hours to get her out the oval. She nearly caused riot. The basket wash up. We lose the parasol. And she talked from the oval straight on to QF. And you know when we reach the gap, what Tanti Merle have the heart to ask me. When next we going back?
Oh my goodness. Oh, Paul Keynes Douglas, Grenadian, settled in Trinidad and Tobago. For those of you young people who might know somebody in the village or in the wards in the tongue named Tanti Merle, now you all know where the Tanti Merle come from. A Tanti Merle in every village. Paul Keynes Douglas there, long before the so-called spoken word in the Caribbean was popular. Paul Keynes Douglas made it popular. The first spoken word, I think, on album, I noticed Ivor said that he has all the albums. I still have in my garage Paul Keynes Douglas albums. I had the pleasure of interviewing him, actually. Must have been about 20 years ago. He passed through Washington, D.C., and I interviewed him. But, he used to run home in the afternoon to get to the radio when Paul Keynes Douglas coming on in the night and so forth. We didn't have television in Guyana back in those days. And Tanti Merle was the hit. Back in time, the spoken word, our Caribbean gift to the world, not skyscrapers and towers. Our imagination, our intellect. Imagine a man sit down and write that. Imagining Tanti Merle. You gotta know cricket good. That's the first thing. You got to understand how old lady does operate, which means that you have to be able to observe. You have to understand the language, what we used to call in the old days, the dialect. You have to understand the language. Really serious imagination. Paul Keynes Douglas, originally from Grenada. I noticed Mary's reminding me of Calabash Alley. That was way back, Mary, way back. I'll tell you a story about Calabash Alley. Used to be a radio serial out of Trinidad. And I think it might have been 1972 or thereabouts. So it's long. You all know my age, you know. I had gotten a part in the first movie made in Guyana. Guyanese taking part, Agro Seaman. And I'd gone back to school, and of course I had to go to each class and explain to them how a movie is made and so on. We were little children, you know. I think I was in Form 1, Form 2, or Form 3. So anyhow, we formed a drama group. We formed a drama group in school. And the late Henry Rodney, who was my classmate, was in the drama group. And the first play we did was Calabash Alley. We took Calabash Alley, which was a radio serial, and put it on stage in Buxton, the Buxton Government Secondary School. And there were two BV boys, Henry Rodney from BV, and the other chap was Donald Nero, I think his name was. And you all remember the old man, Papa George, was the old man in Calabash Alley. Well, Nero looked like an old man, and Henry was talking like an old man. Big thing now, we get all the other cast members. We couldn't agree on who gonna play Papa George. I was the director of the play. And so I took the decision and said I'm going with Henry Rodney. Although he doesn't look too much like an old man, the fact that he was talking like an old man, I went that way. And of course, the rest is history. Henry went on to become one of the great actors in modern Guyana. After that, we did Poke Knocker by Sheikh Sadiq. Henry played the Sultan of Tenga, the Sultan of Turkey. The two lead Poke Knockers were Sultan and Tengar. So Magaril played Tengar. The rest is history. So I remember Calabash Alley well. Frederick Kissoon was the writer of Calabash Alley. And that was way back in the early 70s, Mary. I remember we used to run home, playing cricket, and since you see night setting, because Calabash Alley used to come on at 7 o'clock, from 7 to 7:30, or from 7:30 to 8. I think it's from 7 to 7:30, because at 5 to 8, you used to have B.L. Crombie with the sports news. So I think it was at 7 o'clock. You run home. You all will remember. Good evening to all of you, and welcome to Politics 101. It's good to reminisce and remember the days, and to remind our younger people that we weren't always like this. We weren't always like this. We weren't always like this. And that another world is possible. So my students always ask me, why is it that you go into a class on politics or psychology or science, and a black professor, and they're teaching politics, and next thing you know, they're gone off and they start to talk about John Coltrane and Dizzy Gillespie and Bob Marley and Muhammad Ali, and they're teaching politics. You know, what is it? And you have to explain to them that our experience as a people has always been a total experience. We couldn't exist doing one thing. Even when you were an expert on one thing, you had to do everything. You had to be all rounders. That is why we could produce a Gary Sobers, the greatest cricketer that ever lived, or a Bob Marley. the greatest reggae singer that ever lived, or Mighty Sparrow, who is probably the greatest singer, certainly of the 20th century, of all genres. There's nothing like Sparrow. Nothing. In all genres of music. And that is why we could produce. And you hear Sparrow imitate Satchmo and Dean Martin and so forth. In fact, as you all, the aficionados, would know, Sparrow's best-selling single, was Only a Fool Breaks His Own Heart. A ballad, not a calypso, so versatile. So versatile he was. And I think he's the greatest musical performer of the 20th century, of all genres. And we could produce those people because in the Caribbean, in Black America, we are constantly have to do everything at the same time. The Americans call it code switching. You have to talk a certain way when you're the wrong white people, and then you're the wrong your own people, you talk a certain way, and so forth. Some of my students come into class and they're perfect American. And after 2 or 3 weeks in class, you notice the Caribbean accent coming. Where are you from? My father's Barbadian, my mother's St. Lucian. and when I'm home, I speak like you. And so I come to class, and here you are in class talking to my mother and my father. So, without realizing, they slip into the Caribbean thing. Beautiful. That is why we must cherish all of our identities. All of our identities. Cherish being Guyanese. Cherish being Caribbean. Cherish being East Indian, Amerindian, African, Chinese, Portuguese, European. Cherish all of your identities. Don't let anybody tell you that you have to trade one identity in order to claim the other. We are all of the identities. We are a Creole people, Africans born in the Caribbean, Indians born in the Caribbean. Well, the native indigenous people were here before we all got here. Europeans born in the Caribbean. We are Creolized people in that sense. But our Creolization as a base to it, and the Caribbean Creolization is as an African base. If you take away the African experience from the Caribbean, you will have a totally different civilization. Totally different civilization. So when we say we are speaking Creolese, we are really speaking African Creole. It's a mixture of African languages. And, we have to see African languages at two levels. The tribal language or the ethnic language that each group left Africa with. And then the African language that they create over here. And then the Caribbean language, which is grounded in the African languages. Later on, our East Indian and Chinese and Portuguese brothers and sisters would come and they would add something. But by the time they got here, the Creolese was entrenched and they basically fell into the African-based Creole. When you say to people that soca is really a merging of the African drum beat and the India Tassa beat, they say, no way. And you ask why. And they say, because what you're hearing there is more the African beat. No, you're hearing the African and Indian beat, but the base of it is the African. So if you take away the African beat from soca, it's no longer soca, no longer calypso. And it's why when you listen to Super Blue and those chaps from down south in Trinidad, you hear a kind of that Shango beat, or the Tobagonian, the shadow, that heartbeat. So we are a creolized people, but not a creolized people outside of the other cultural forms. One can ask, when did we stop being African and becoming Caribbean or becoming Creole? My cousins and them next door to us there in Buxton and Annandale, they call themselves Congo Creole. So they weren't just Creole, they were Creoles, Congo Creole. Then they left out the Congo because they traced their ancestry back to the Congos. And they were on the Lusignan estate. And they came off the Lusignan estate and settled in southern Annandale. Some went over to Buxton. But the majority of them there. And so they're Creole, but they're Congo Creole. They recognize that Congo didn't stop and Creole start, that the Congo Creole wrap up together. Congo Creole, see them a go away one by one. That same drama group that I mentioned there, the youngest member of that group, Sylvie London, just passed away this past week. The rest of us were, 14 and 15, and Sylvie was, 10, 11. So she was always little Sylvie. She passed away. Sylvie London passed away. Our condolences to our relatives and my friend Marcel Gwenny, also from Buxton, passed away. Good evening to you all and welcome to Politics 101. It's Wednesday evening and lots to talk about. I want to start. By something that caught my eyes last night as I was listening to the news, watching the news, and I want to share that and to start our conversation. With that. Let's see here. Here we go.
Biggleman Gasha Things, compliments of One Communications, Banks Beer, Guinness, XM Rums, 592 Teas, Fireside Grill, and Sheriff Security. Please drink responsibly. She said, take it easy, I will do it. You know I do. The rights of Indigenous women in Guyana are a priority for the government of Guyana, according to Minister of Amerindian Affairs, Pauline Sukai. She made the comments while she addressed the 24th session of the Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues yesterday at the UN headquarters in New York. Addressing the UN Forum on Interregional, Intergenerational, and Global Dialogue on the Rights of Indigenous Women, Minister Sukai said she is pleased to be part of a government that advances women's rights in the country, with Indigenous women's rights being a priority. The Amerindian Affairs Minister said Indigenous women are increasingly involved in politics, both nationally and locally, and it is evident across the country.
30 years ago, when I entered Parliament, there were few Indigenous women parliamentarians. Today, 39% of women in Parliament are Indigenous. 3 Indigenous women have led the Ministry of Amerindian Affairs in my country.
Minister Sukai also said in Guyana, the government continues to ensure the improvements of the socio-economic conditions of indigenous women, providing the necessary funding for them to develop their businesses and thrive.
Funding of entrepreneurial opportunities in agriculture, ecotourism, and traditional economic activities is provided through the national budget. The Youth Entrepreneurial and Apprenticeship Program provides training and business opportunities for indigenous youths. 63% of the participants are indigenous women.
Additionally, she said the government has advanced equitable access to healthcare and education nationwide. New and upgraded healthcare infrastructure and telemedicine services are expanding across Amerindian villages, she said, while adding that these improvements prioritize indigenous women's healthcare, including financial aid for universal healthcare and cancer screening.
Special emphasis is placed on expanding access to education in indigenous communities through teachers training, construction of new schools, and expanding investment in ICT connectivity. Reaffirming our country's realization of empowerment of indigenous women through education, they can now access tuition-free university and technical education, as well as fully funded international scholarships.
The Amerindian Affairs Minister said while access to clean and safe water supply by indigenous populations continues to be a challenge globally, 91% of the indigenous villages in Guyana have access to potable water. She predicts that by the end of this year, 100% of the villages will have access to potable water. Minister Sukai also said, too, that combating sexual and gender-based violence remains a priority for Guyana, pointing to the recently passed Family Violence Act, which strengthens the legal framework on domestic violence, enhances protections for victims and survivors, and ensures offenders are held accountable. Minister Sukai said the protection of indigenous women's rights and their economic and social development are only possible through political will, matched with the requisite resources. The current administration, she said, has reaffirmed its commitment to proactively promote and support indigenous women's rights and development. The UN Forum is being held from the 21st of April until the 2nd of May, under the theme implementing the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples within United Nations member states and the United Nations system, including identifying good practices and addressing challenges.
Thank you very much, Gordon. Gordon Mosley, news source. Now, only last week, you had the African Forum. Only last week. And the government sent 3 delegations: ERC, the government delegation, and EPAD or APAD or whatever they call themselves. And they went to an African forum and talked about what the government is doing for Guyana. The ERC delegation was headed by an Indian Guyanese. This week, you have the Amerindian Forum. Who is speaking for Amerindian? The Amerindian minister, an Amerindian woman. And she's able to sit there and talk about what the government is doing for Amerindian people, including some numbers, some statistics. Now, the issue here is not whether she's lying or she's overplaying what the government has done for Amerindian. The fact of the matter is that at least they can point to things and policies that are directly directed at Amerindians, or general policies in which Amerindians have disproportionately benefited. Now, absolutely nothing is wrong with that. That is what the forum is about. You go to an Amerindian forum and you say what the country is doing for Amerindian people. And the assumption is that given the history of our country, Amerindian people have been left behind, whether it's potable water, whether it's education, whether it's entrepreneurship. And so therefore government, that entity that we create to look after the security of all of us, the government has to do things for that community to bring it in line with the rest of the country. Nothing is wrong with that. That is the function of government. African people are next in line. The Europeans brought us here in chains, kept us in chains from 200 to 400 years, took away our personhood, our peoplehood, transform us from people to chattel. No, not even, although there was genocide against native Indians, killed by European disease and European weapons, at least they maintained their humanity. African humanity was taken away. It means, therefore, that Africans are in the same boat as Amerindians. They are left behind not because something is wrong with them, not because of choices they made, but because of the systemic and political and economic development of the country. And so our two endangered ethnicities in Guyana are Africans and Amerindians. Amerindians who are exposed to genocide. You go in some of the Caribbean countries, you can't find one Amerindian. Genocide. Columbus, by the time Columbus finished his tour journey, Amerindians are dying like flies. So it was genocide against Amerindians. And genocide on a larger scale against Africans. And so those two ethnic groups have been endangered. And the post-colonial state has a right, has a duty to bring those two ethnic groups in line with the rest of the society. Yet we hear a government can go to the United Nations and speak about what it does for Amerindians. God bless them, they're right. Amerindians need the government intervention. But when it was time to talk about what they have done as a state, policy-wise, for Africans, they couldn't speak. It's either they didn't do anything policy-wise for Africans, they have not done, or they have done and they don't know, or they're doing something to Africans that they don't want the world to know. But we see clearly here the hypocrisy of this government. One could say, well, it's doing for the state is directing some policies to Amerindian because it wants Amerindian votes. But they tell us they want African votes too. Why are they not directing policy? Why could they not go to the United Nations and talk about what they're doing for African Guyanese women? Minister Rodriguez concentrated on African Guyanese women. So far, so good. Why Mr. Pelowri Joe? Sorry, I don't like to do that. Why Mr. Hamilton could not go there armed with statistics about what this government is doing policy-wise for African women in education, in entrepreneurship, and all the other areas. Why? Why? The simple answer is that they have done nothing policy-wise. And they have said they don't need to do anything policy-wise, because insofar as African people are in trouble, it had nothing to do with the colonial state. It had nothing to do with the present state. It had to do with choices African people made. So it has washed its hands on Africans. You are not going to see from the PPP anything policy-wise to deal with the structural problems of the African community. They're not, because they're saying Africans don't have a problem, and insofar as they may have a problem, it had to do with them. So they depend on their own. They have acknowledged that Amerindians have a problem, and that something is being done to deal with the problems. 91% of Africans, of Amerindians community, have potable water. By next year, 100%. What is the percentage of Africans who have potable water? Tell us. Tell us. You can't tell us. But yet you go and say all the things that we have done for African Guyanese. It is not what you have done for Peter or Johnny or Joyce. They are not the sum total of the community. It is what you have done for the community. And how do you measure the progress in the community? You measure progress in the community by their access to the things, the social goods, the economic goods that other groups have access to. Other groups have access to potable water, then Africans must have access to potable water. Other groups have access to loans in the bank to start businesses, then Africans should have that. The rest of the nation has access to quality education, then Africans should have access to quality education. That is how you measure progress and transformation. If you run a highway through an African community, it will have some impact on that community, but that impact is indirect rather than direct. In America, they call such highways the interstate highway. A highway passed through New York. The highway is in the United States, not necessarily in New York. That is why on that highway, a state trooper could stop you, but a federal trooper could also stop you. And the US Supreme Court has said the supremacy clause says that the American government has more right on that highway than the local government. And so when they begin to talk about what they've done for African, and they point to some boy that starts some business and so on, what? I've had the good privilege, people like me, of going on and doing PhDs. Do our PhDs amount to the fact that African people in Guyana have equal access to education? 50% of Guyanese who start Form 1, by the time they get to exam, 50% of them drop out from school. And if we were to ask for the numbers among Africans, it would be higher than 50%. Among Amerindians, it would be higher than 50%. So if someone points to my PhD as an individual as a reflection of where the community is, you're fooling yourself and fooling people. My PhD is a reflection of if the playing field is level, where our community could be. That is the importance of those of us who manage to get a PhD or become a lawyer or become a CPA or become a registered nurse. That is, we've moved to the top of our profession. And so this government, just a week after mamagayin, fooling themselves, because they didn't fool the people at that conference, that United Nations meeting. They didn't fool African Guyanese, they fooled themselves. 1 week later, you are seeing what a government needs to go to that forum, or forums like those, fora like those, and to say, the fact that you couldn't say it for African Guyanese means that it doesn't exist. I started off tonight by talking about the African base of our Guyanese and Caribbean culture. It is not that Africans have a superior culture. Oh no. It is because the institution of slavery for 400 years determined the outlook of the world political economy. Everything was before slavery and after slavery. And it wasn't 400 days, 400 years. The African was the subject of slavery and the object of slavery. The wealth that was created by slavery, wealth that is still present today, was created on the backs and the labor of the African. The environment, making the environment habitable, that was the responsibility and the burden of the African. And so it was the African experience that determined the motion of our Caribbean. White people benefited from slavery, tremendous wealth. But that wealth was not created by them. Some of them never set foot in the Caribbean. The wealth was created by the African. And culture and cultural expression arise out of the way people see and participate in politics and economics. And it is out of that that comes cultural expression. Their song, their dance, their painting, their writing, their academics, their agriculture, the way they see politics, the way they see the world, all arise out of their day-to-day experience. And the African for 400 years, on a day-to-day basis, had to confront the most inhuman experience that human beings have ever, as a collective, gone through. And so, therefore, the African expression tells the real story of those 400 years. And so today, 150, 200 years later, it is the African historical memory that shapes the Caribbean memory of itself. Calypso could not come from East Indians. They weren't there on the slave plantation. It's Calypso is an anti-slavery language in song. It had to come from the slaves, the enslaved. Couldn't come from Portuguese and East Indians and Amerindians. Jazz and the blues, anti-slavery music, couldn't come from white Americans or brown Americans or yellow Americans. It had to come from black Americans. Not because their culture is superior. It is because they are engaged in combating and surviving against the most inhuman system in the world. So Calypso, the mother music of our Caribbean, is first and foremost the mother music of Africans in the Caribbean. They brought the Kaiso from West Africa. That's the first thing. The call and the response. They brought that with them from Africa. So they brought it from Africa. But then they used it as a weapon of resistance against enslavement, moving it from Kaiso to Calypso, the mother music of our Caribbean. Jazz, the mother music of America, Black America and America. Yet, in 2025, the Guyana government has not seen it fit to recognize the dispossession 400 years and more of dispossession of the Africans. Not only they were not paid for the work they did for 400 years and beyond, but what they've created for us in music and dance and writing and painting, we have not paid them for it. We jump about Calypso. We jump about soul music. We jump about folk music. Who created those commodities? The African collective. And we have not been paid for that. So we have not been paid for work done, and we have not been paid for gifts and commodities we produce that is creating wealth for the society today. Yet our government goes before the United Nations and say all is well with Africans. Insofar as they are badly off, is that they have made bad choices. Sisters and brothers, part of our problem with the African in Guyana is that the African in Guyana does not talk about his or her full story. There's always a but in our story. We always speak in whispers. Our Amerindian brothers and sisters, they talk their story in I understand that I'm not even supposed to say Amerindians. They're insisting that we say indigenous people. Yet when we said we don't want to be called Negroes, they call us racists. The problem with the African in Guyana is that the African in Guyana is partly ashamed of being African, and partly ashamed, and partly don't want to offend others. And so we have a situation in Guyana, the only place in the Caribbean where they're going to send non-Africans to speak for Africans. It would not happen in Jamaica. I guarantee you that. It wouldn't happen in Barbados, and Barbados is probably the most conservative of the Caribbean. It wouldn't happen there. It wouldn't happen in Antigua. But it could happen in Guyana, where an East Indian government could send an East Indian man to the United Nations to speak for Africans. And all that Africans do is go out to party. No big deal. I'm saying it wouldn't happen in Jamaica. But we in Guyana, as African people, we have lost the will to stand up for ourselves. And we produce leaders who act that way. Which brings me to the Buddha book that we find ourselves in. The opposition and the election. Let's get through the nonsense. This election is a competition between an East Indian bloc, an East Indian party, and an African bloc that is made up of an African party and others who are not far behind. The PPP knows from the census that there's been migration of East Indians, 25,000 upwards. They know that. That is why they're not releasing the thing. They know that the so-called mixed vote and the so-called African vote is the same damn thing. So when you say 29% African and 20% mix, 90% of those mix are really black people. So the black population in Guyana, is 45% upwards. Whereas the East Indian population is about 40% downwards. So there are more Africans, more black people in the population than Indian people. We are a minority, a country of minorities, but a plurality of that minority. A plurality, is African. Amerindians are holding steady between 10 and 15%. East Indians are between 35 and 40%. Black people are between 45 and 50%. That's the raw numbers. That's the raw numbers. And those are the numbers the PPP don't want us to see and to hear. Because what it does is that it will say to black people, stop crying. The opposition will not lose this election because Aubrey Norton is the presidential candidate or because Nigel Hughes is not the presidential candidate. The opposition will lose this election by a combination of factors. One, its inability to stop the PPP from rigging. The PPP intends to recoup the losses through migration by, first of all, rigging. And the opposition has not been able to stop the PPP from rigging. The PPP is going to try to get some of the immigrant votes. So they hope through immigrant votes, rigging, and suppressing the black vote. They give us the impression that they want to get black vote. Well, we took care of that. They send the slave catchers and we say, take your lick body out of here. Story over. Over. We took care of that already. In any case, the PPP is never going to bank their victory on black people vote. Never. What they're trying to do is to make black people feel that plenty black people go into the PPP. And so we down arms and say we lose already. They're trying to get black people to say that the black government, the coalition government, never do nothing for them. And then black people down arms and say that they're stupidness. So the PPP is trying to suppress the African vote. PPP know even if they get 2,000 black people to vote for them, it's not even a seat. They are not depending on black people to get 5 seats, 25. They know it ain't gonna happen. So they want to down the spirits of black people, suppress their vote and down their spirit. While they rig, and not rig illegally, rig legally. Rig through GCOM legally. And probably pick up a seat or two from the immigrants. The PPP's biggest nightmare is to see all those Africans that you all are calling presidential candidate. Aubrey, Nigel, Terence, Amanza, whoever else are you calling. The PPP know if all of those people stand for them, and talk straight, the days are numbered. The days are numbered. You see, the AFC in 2006 took away about 10 to 15% of PNC votes. The PNC got 34%. The AFC came in with about 6 or 7%. Usually around that time, the PNC used to get about 40, 41, 42% of the vote. And so what the AFC did in 2006 with Raphael Trotman, who was a breakaway from the PNC, is they took away about 15% of the African vote. But even with 34% of the African vote, that 34% still represented 75 to 80 to 85% of the African vote. So even when the PNC was at its lowest in 2006, it still got over 80% of the black vote. And Robert Corbyn did a master stroke. How will I get back that 15 to 20% that went over there? They went to the AFC because they fed up with the PNC. They felt the PNC was lame. The PNC had as its leader somebody who's not electable. So they went to the AFC. And you know what Corbyn did? Corbyn went to his arch enemy, the WPA. He went to Clive Thomas and Rupert Rupnaraine. And said, them who gone over there, we got to bring them back. And to bring them back, these two arch enemies have to come together. They came together. They formed the APNU, a Partnership for National Unity. I don't have to tell you all who came up with the name for it. I will leave that as the top secret. In 2011, the APNU went from 34 to close to 44%. The Africans came back from the PNC, from the AFC to the PNC/WPA. But as luck would have it for the AFC, Moses Nagamutu get chased out of the PPP. And when he get chased out, he said, "Gone," and he brought over Indian following, Region 5, Region 6. He brought those Indians over. And so where the black people left and went back to PNC, which is now PNC/WPA, the Indian people came into the AFC. All Ravidev Roar people, the Indian party people, all of them poured into the AFC in 2011. So the Nagamutu factor in 2011 was important. And so the AFC could go to the PNC and strike a hard bargain. And they did. And the argument wasn't that we bring 10 seats, 20 seats, we bring Indians. And you all will need them to tip over. We went separately in 2011. Together, we got a parliamentary majority, and we had what is called a minority government. For those who are talking about minority government, we had a minority government between 2011 and 2015. And that minority government was led by the PPP, and we got nothing out of the PPP. Absolutely nothing. All that happened is we were able to delay things. Finally, when we couldn't do it no more, we threatened a no confidence vote. Ramattar closed it down and called fresh election. After all the palaver about not joining and not joining, the fact of the matter, if you didn't join in 2015, you couldn't win. the AFC was forced to join in 2015. The logic took them there. And we triumphed by 1 seat. 4,000 votes, 5,000 votes the most. 1 seat, 1 seat, 1 seat. In fact, we got less votes in 2015 than we got in 2011. And I know why we got less votes. We got less young people vote, young black people. I was there in 2011. Young black people left Guinness Bar and they left the thing and come out and vote like a boss. In 2015, we squeaked by with less votes than we got in 2011. A lot of people don't know that. By the time we got to 2020, the Indians had gone home back to the PPP. The external forces had come in, and the rest is history. Where we are in 2025, the AFC does not have Indian votes to bring. The AFC, the PNC, the WPA are all competing for the same vote, black people votes. We're all competing for the same vote. And I think the quintessential African if you cut them when you go in, you can get a 80%, a 75%, 80% PNC in them. And then the next 25 is a little bit of WPA, a little bit of AFC, a little bit of whoever else. But I am willing to make this argument that the average African voter in 2025 is not a single party voter. Mix up in them is a piece for each of us. In some of you, you know, the rebels, some of you may be 80 WPA, but not the majority. Some of you may be 80 AFC, but not the majority. The African voter in 2025 is complex. And what I don't understand, but I do understand, about those who are analyzing, they don't understand that basic thing because they have not studied their own people and their own country. The average Indian voter is more monolithic. You're likely to have an Indian voter that the majority of Indian vote 100% PPP. The African vote is much more complex. But, and this is the reason why African people are vexed that with the AFC. Because they understand that in them, there's a little bit of AFC, a little bit of WPA, a big bit of PNC. And they understand that when Nigeria and the AFC walk away, they know that they're gone with a piece of them. That is why our base is reacting to Nigeria like that. And I don't think the AFC are dunce people. They must understand that. Our people have a keen sense. That is why they're reacting. If we go separately, what we are putting before our people is to choose between and among good leaders. And the rational thing in an election where the other side is not choosing, the logical thing on this side is that we don't have the luxury of choosing. If the FC insists on going alone, they're forcing black people who like them, who like Nigel, to say, Nigel, we love you, boy, but that love really is based on the assumption that you in the family. Look, nobody don't have to tell me, David Hines, that if I outside the family, black people will see me differently. I know that. I'm stupid. And the FC is not stupid. It is not that African people don't believe that Nigel and David are good people and so on. But when we are in the family and with the family, our legitimacy goes up. Nigel himself, I heard him say that he is reading the criticism that he's getting. Well, Nigel, we could have told you so. And the criticism is not that they don't love you, they still love you. They still love you. But in a war that we are in, there's no love in war. And this election, I don't care what Norton say, what Nigel you say. I am saying to you all tonight, for us on the opposition side, the biggest factor in this election is the survival of African people in Guyana. I want to repeat that. I don't care what Nigel says, what Aubrey says. I don't care what they quote, I am saying for the base, for African people, this election is a referendum on their own ability to survive in a country that they slave for, that they build a cabin, that they plant a corn. This election is a referendum on that. And as Vincent said, the time for polite silence is over. This election is about whether African people will live as equal citizens in Guyana or second-class citizens. Pauline Sakai said plain that, look, we are trying with Amerindians. Mr. Pulauri Jordan said we are trying with Africans. This election is about a referendum on whether African people will live as equal human beings in Guyana. I'm not saying that if the coalition win, everything would be well for black people. I'm not that stupid. But I'm saying to you all here tonight, if the WP is part of any government after the coming election, that government will have to deal with the uncomfortable presence of a party that is going to demand that that government puts an end to extrajudicial killing and murder of African young men and African people. And we're not going to be begging in silence. It will have to be a policy by that government. That teachers and public servants who are giving the most to Guyana and getting the least, their wages. We can listen to the economists and tell us about inflation and all deflations. But after then, the WPA will demand, you gotta raise those people's wages. And if the WPA is part of government, we would stop cash grants and we will replace it by cash transfers by law. And the cash transfers will be based on a percentage of the oil taken, and that percentage of the oil taken will be divided among the families by law. You're going to be guaranteed, whether it's every 6 months, every month, every year, the numbers people will tell us, but you're going to be guaranteed Ghana cash grants and cash transfers based on law and based on a direct percentage of the oil takings. Any government that the WPA is part of will have to come to the table and talk about changing governance. Absolutely no way that someone with 51% of the vote can be sitting there and making all the decisions for the rest of us or the rest of them who represent 49%. All citizens who are affected by decision making will be at the table to make decisions. We will have to figure out whether it's going to be power sharing, shared governance, inclusive governance, whatever it is. Whatever it is, we're going to settle the governance question. Any government that the WPA is part of will have to put an end to rig elections, to use its authority to put an end to rigged elections. The present chairperson will have to go. To clear the way. And we have to find a way to make GECOM a professional organization. There's always going to be partisanship. You can't take that away from an individual. Each individual has a right to like a party, but when you're performing the function, you're not performing the function for a party. You're performing the function for your country. So this nonsense of going separately to create some minority government. As my leader, my elder, Baba AUC, who is now 100 years old, in 1964, when nobody won with 50%, and some of the leaders in the PNC were saying, well, all right, let Jagan go and take the government and let him run a minority government. And then we're going to bring him down with no confidence. And my elder left Buxton on a rainy night and went down to Congress Place and tell them in there that them people in the rain outside Congress Place, they're not in the rain for no minority government. Give Mr. Digar what he wants and take the government. The rest is history. And I am saying no. 61 years later, our supporters are not in this election for any minority government. They want a government that is going to free them from the modern day shackles of slavery. Acknowledge what Mr. Norton brings. Acknowledge what Mr. Hughes and the AFC brings. Acknowledge what lesser mortals like us in the WPA bring. Acknowledge it. And let us move forward by winning this election. That's what our people want us to do. They want us to win this election and to win it together. They do not want a minority government. The reason they're saying to the PNC and the FC go back to the table, they're not sending you all back there to continue this 60-40 nonsense. They're sending you all back there to say, think of your foreparents. Think of them in shackles. And think about what they did. African people do not want a minority government. We want to win this election because win this election will guarantee us in short order, in short term, our survival in the country. It's not going to solve our problems, but it is going to take away the sword of Damocles over our heads. And I can tell you, the WPA in government or out of government will not tolerate a coalition government doing to Indian people what the PPP has done to black people. There's always going to be the temptation for revenge. But a revenge and revenge get all of Rasia. Because the PPP come in and they want to take revenge on black people for what Burnham do them. And we may be tempted to want to take revenge, but it will not get us anywhere. But we have to win and take institutional power. And then commit ourselves to do what needs to be done. But first and foremost, to save black people. The minute you take power, the next day, the slave catchers are going to come knocking at your door. I come back to the AFC. I come back to the PNC. Well, they can't come to WP because they never left us. The AFC and the PNC will decide whether they're going to take them back. But all the slave catchers, the day you take power, the next minute, they turn and go down on their knees and beg pardon. It changes. It changes. It changes. Power, power. It doesn't solve the entire problem. It doesn't even begin to solve the problem in any fundamental way. But it gives African people the opportunity to at least symbolically live as equal citizens. So this nonsense about going on your own and going on your own is what it is, nonsense. And I credit the AFC with more sense than that. I repeat, you cannot watch the leader of the PNC, whatever you may think about him, and say to him, give me 40%, when even at its darkest days in 2006, the PNC held on to 75-80% of the black vote. In its darkest days. And you go to the man and say, give me 40%. If you win with 33 seats, 40%, 2/5 of 33, you're talking about 12, 13 seats. How can you go and ask the people for 13 seats? And the presidential candidate? That is not negotiation. That is a recipe for non-coalition. The minute you do that, you are really saying, I don't want coalition. Y'all don't get me wrong. We in the WPA got to do we own negotiation. But we know what we are negotiating for, and we know what we are saying to our partners that we have done and can do. Me say last night, when you not get muma, so granny. And you're not going to look for somebody else granny. That granny you muma. So, black folks, you all start this nonsense. Black people, including some of you all who's Aubrey people. You all start this nonsense about Aubrey not electable. And you all repeat it. And I'm sure Nigel and them hear it, and they believe they can carry that to the table. Any one of us is electable. All of us have our negatives. All of us have our positives. All of us have a role to play. Some roles are unique, and some roles are common to all of us. So, sisters and brothers, are you stop this nonsense? Are you stop this nonsense? If some of us decide to walk away, we'll have to make, those of us who stay, we'll have to make a difficult choice. I am not going to go on any platform. Let's say the AFC walks away eventually and they go on their own. I am not going on any platform to cuss Nigel Hughes. I'm telling you all that up front. Even if he walks away, I ain't cussing him on no platform. I'm not cussing any black man who means well. So I'm not going to be cussing Nigel. But I will have to politely say to Africans, you can't make love on hungry belly. Remember Sparrow the one, you can't make love on hungry belly. Our love for those who don't want to come with the family will not be diminished. But we can't make love on hungry belly. Love without power. Get away where we're there right now. We want love and power. What Sharada said, pace and power. Well, I had a little variation, love and power. Love by itself is not going to do it. It has to be love and power. And we can't have power with some minority government with Irfan Ali heading it. I want to thank all of you who have expressed confidence in the WPA. I want to thank you all from the bottom of our hearts, because we understand what we're up against. And we shall be reaching out to each of you to help us with ideas as we press forward, to help us. You don't have to be a card-carrying member to help us, because we need all the help that we can get. We still have the outstanding matter of biometrics and a clean voters list. We can do everything else right. And if we don't get those two things right, we're in pickle. Because the PPP is banking on rigging, legally and illegally, but more legally. And we have to stop them from doing it. So our task is tremendous. We are better off with Nigel using the AFC with the family. We are better off. And we are family. We may be from different fathers. Some of us may be from middle-class father. Some of us from working-class father. Some of us will be father from tongue. Some of us will be father from country. But we are family. We are family. And we have to be family in this time. And we are family at different levels. Family at the phenotypical level, black. Family at the ideological level, you may not be phenotypically black, but ideologically, you're sometimes more black. Ganesh Maipal is more black than Pilar Rijo. He's not phenotypically black. But ideologically, he's more black. Than the likes of Hamilton. So this family is a phenotypical African family, but it's also an ideological family. So we have to see it at different levels. But at the base of the family are the phenotypical blacks. But we are not the only members of the family. The family includes non-phenotypical blacks who are ideologically black. I don't get into this stupid multiracial nonsense. I've been there and I understand what multiracialism is. I have nothing in common beyond the phenotype with a slave catcher. A slave catcher is black in color only. I have nothing in common beyond phenotype. I have more in common with an Indian, an Amerindian, a Chinese, and a Portuguese who feel the pain of the African and want to be part of the solution to free up the shackles from the feet of the African so that the shackles from the feet of all Guyanese will be freed up. I have more in common with that Indian than with an African slave catcher. I have nothing in common with Mark Phillips beyond the phenotype. I have nothing in common with those two beasts who shot those two boys in Linden. I have nothing in common with them beyond phenotype. Let's talk black tonight. My blackness is not a foolish blackness. I have nothing in common with the outgoing president of the Teachers Union who sold out his teachers, his members. I have nothing in common with him beyond the black face. Nothing. Sir Samaru, whether you vote PPP or vote coalition, that's not my business. He stood up for teachers, mainly African teachers. I have more in common with Sir Samaru than I have with the outgoing president and vice president. Let's talk race. But when I go into the United Nations to talk about African business, Ganesh, we love you, but you can't go. GHK, Lal, we love you, but you can't go. We have to get our story straight. And once we get our story straight, we're going to be all right. I watched on Sunday as my young brothers and sisters, children, marching down the streets of Linden, tears came to my eyes. And we are saying that young people are not conscious. They're far more conscious than we are. That's the problem. Any race that has that kind of energy that I saw in Linden on Sunday and on the day after the shooting, any race that has that firepower, that human firepower at its disposal, should not be crying and living as second-class citizens. Should not. I love Brother Aubrey. I love him. But brother, when you say that we don't go on the street, you lock down that energy that we saw on the streets there on Sunday. You lock it down by saying that we shouldn't go on the road. That energy needs to be on the road. And when you harness that energy in struggle, in resistance, it's easy to get them to go and vote. When you lock them down, and you go the day before election and try to tell them to go and vote, they have every right to suck the teeth on you. Our leaders need to be tougher. They need to be tougher. Jack Dio said, this is not the party of Jagan. You hear what Jeffrey said last night? Janet Jagan said, no, not Ramkarani, too soft. She give it to a orangutan named Jack Dio. And we saying Aubrey North is orangutan and we don't want them. The other side said this is toughness because you're confronting black people. Ralph Ramkaran gonna be too soft. Give it to a bad man. But we up on this side, Aubrey Norton too ugly, Aubrey Norton a smile, Aubrey Norton this, Aubrey Norton that. He's a political scientist, but beyond that he's nothing. We sometimes talk till we overtalk and talk nonsense. All of us are what our parents made us to be. They didn't watch me and say, you're going to turn out to be nothing. Even if you didn't do right, they still push you. By the rivers of Babylon, where we sat down and where we wept, when we remember Zion. For the wicked carry us away captivity, required from us a song. But how can we sing a freedom song in a strange land? We shall overcome. We have always overcome. We shall overcome.